How can you take off Wheel of Fortune? I'm just about to solve the puzzle, and you're telling me about some tornado.
This is a test. Skies opened up.
A heat wave comes.
Sandstorm happened.
Miles and miles and miles of things level.
Men's fortunes rise and fall based on whether the clouds come or go.
No matter what part of the world you call home, the weather, above all else, determines how you live your day-to-day lives. And I'm not just talking about grabbing an umbrella when it's raining or a coat when it's cold. Its influence goes much further. The weather has inspired revolutionary inventions, determined winners in countless wars, created legends in the lab and in our stadiums, and even helped shape many of our unforgettable music, movies, and pop culture moments. I'm Harry Connick Jr., and welcome to the 100 Biggest Weather Moments. If you think this list is nothing but hurricanes, hottest temperatures, and torrential rains, think again. These are pivotal events written in the pages of history, and for many of us, images that are forever etched into our minds. Before we continue on with the countdown, let's take a quick look back at moments 100 through 78. The next moment on our list. In the mid-1960s, the Beach Boys had an entire generation desperate to take a surfing safari of their own. But since the warm waters of the Pacific were more than just a beach jog away for most fans, millions could only surf vicariously through the songs. One Michigan inventor, however, didn't let his distance from the coast deter his dreams. Instead, the songs inspired him to create our next weather moment, a board that would give generations of landlocked riders the chance to hang 10.
A guy named Sherman Poppin. No relation to Mary Poppin, folks. No wind there, no umbrellas flying around, no chim-chim-cheree, but Sherman Poppin. Give the man credit, because thanks to him, here's the snowboard. Let's go snurfing.
On Christmas Day of 1965, Sherman Poppin put two snow skis together, and the sport of snowboarding was born. Poppin's wife combined the words snow and surf and dubbed the contraption a snurfer. As the technology got more sophisticated, baggy pants Gen Xers with daredevil attitudes embraced the sport.
These kids are geniuses, and they got athletic talent. We grew up playing basketball and football, and I think you got to be a pretty good athlete to do that as well. But these kids are something else.
I remember ski resorts, especially up in the Northeast, just not even allowing snowboarders.
I used to be one of the people to hate snowboarders. Oh, why are you on this mountain? I want to go to Deer Valley where there's no snowboarders, until I tried it. It's almost like surfing the snow, and it's effortless. You don't hear any edges. You just see the snow billowing up from the front of the snowboard.
I have been to the X Games and have been in awe of the tricks that they've done.
The worldwide craze hit the jackpot in 1998 when snowboarding became an official Olympic sport.
Seeing the popularity of it in the last Olympics in Torino, it was extraordinary and fun to watch.
I didn't know it would actually catch on and just become rampant the way it has.
Now you have the flying tomato, not only hurling down a hill at 80 miles an hour, but like jumping over 18-wheelers.
I probably wouldn't pick that redhead kid to play on my basketball team if I was picking in a gym, but watching him snowboard, you want him on your snowboard team.
It's spectacular. I think it's just only going to continue to grow.
It'd be impossible to imagine America in the 20th century without the influence of Irish Americans on the culture.
Henry Ford, Ronald Reagan, JFK, Conan O'Brien, Rosie O'Donnell. We had so many people who have descendants that can be traced back to that Irish potato famine.
In 1845, an unusually cold, rainy spring and summer allowed a tiny fungus to ruin the Irish potato crop. So important was the potato to this farming nation that in just 5 years, nearly 1/3 of the population had either starved or left Ireland. The migration continued for a generation, bringing 1 million refugees to cities like Boston and New York. Met with signs that read "No Irish Need Apply," the indomitable Celtic spirit tackled the American status quo head-on.
If you've been hungry, I think you're always hungry to achieve.
And something we have that's different is possibly we're an island people and we don't know our place.
They worked hard and they built their parishes and they built their own school systems.
Spread Catholicism here, and you start getting now 1 out of every 4 Americans are Catholic.
And into politics, then they gradually came up and were accepted.
My great-great-grandfather, who came here in 1864 at the age of 12, eventually became a Tammany Hall politician here in New York and became the president of the Board of Education. The point at which my grandfather immigrated in the 1860s to the election of John F. Kennedy, 100 years, the Irish went from completely scorned to completely accepted.
Now, St. Patrick's Day Parade, right? Everybody wants to be Irish.
It's interesting how that all has to go back to some really rotten weather in Ireland in the 1840s.
On February 3rd, 1959, the Winter Dance Party Tour was in the middle of its 3-week Midwest run. Now, I know what this is like. You play a gig, you drive all night to the next place, play another gig, and on and on. But on this night, the heater on their tour bus had broken down, and as the entourage pulled into a small Iowa town, a few band members were worried they might be getting frostbite. With the prospect of 8 more hours of bone-chilling drive to Minnesota ahead of him, the headlining act and one of rock and roll's early legends made a change in travel plans that would change the course of music history.
When rockabilly legend Buddy Holly chartered an airplane to avoid another freezing night on his unheated tour bus, he sealed not only his fate, but that of Ritchie Valens and the Big Bopper, who joined him on the flight. The small aircraft went down shortly after takeoff on February 3rd, 1959, near Cedar Lake, Iowa, leaving no survivors.
You don't want to be in a little airplane that weighs 3,000 pounds with a single engine, no capability for shedding ice off its wings.
The brutal cold, a blinding snowstorm, and likely ice on the wings all conspired to rob America of one of her brightest new stars.
Buddy Holly's death really took the American influence out of rock and roll for a good while. There for 4 or 5 years, American rock and roll was just not the same.
People look back and they hear the guitar riffs and stuff and you go, well, that's stuff I hear all the time. But if it was the first time that had ever been heard.
Almost everybody who claims rock and roll heritage owes a debt of gratitude of some sort to Buddy Holly.
For him to be that young and die when he's 22, it's just amazing how much he accomplished.
He had the look. I mean, those black glasses and that hairdo and the way he would dress and the way he moved on stage, he was part of a movement that was simmering in music that just would never and has never happened again.
The fact that weather played a role in kind of the end, and I mean, it seems so bleak the day the music died, but I mean, that's the great thing about music, man. It lives on.
It's called the Serum Run, and every winter it and its competitive counterpart, the Iditarod, pay homage to one of the greatest missions of mercy in modern history.
To me, the Iditarod is one of the tougher sports there is because of the weather. I mean, it's just brutal.
Known as the last great race on Earth, the Iditarod commemorates the moment when man and animal raced to save an entire town from disaster.
There was an outbreak of diphtheria in the village of Nome. There was one doctor there, and they had absolutely no serum to treat the sick.
Fearing that all 1,500 villagers in Nome could be wiped out by spring, a batch of life-saving serum was delivered by train to Nenana, the end of rail service, still some 658 miles from Nome. However, the governor of Alaska was unwilling to risk his one shipment of serum on small planes not built to fly in the 40-below temperatures. So with the outbreak spreading and time growing short, authorities concluded the only way to deliver the serum was by dog sled.
They thought it would take about a month to get the serum from Nenana to Nome.
The valuable cargo was passed from team to team as the heroic Huskies raced across mountains, frozen rivers, dense forests, and deep crevices, through blizzards and black winter nights. Miraculously, just 5.5 days after leaving Nenana, the 19th and final dog sled team with musher Gunnar Kaysen and his lead dog Balto arrived in Nome.
Balto became the hero, and there is a monument in Central Park of New York to Balto. Somewhat folklore, I guess, to this day, but the Iditarod is run to commemorate the serum run of 1925.
Coming up next on the 100 biggest weather moments.
The sky just turned bright blood red.
Kind of brought New Yorkers together, even if we had to get together in the dark.
And the last winning lotto number is 40. 40! I won! I won!
Welcome back. It was the night the lights went out in Gotham. On one summer's day in 1977, millions of New Yorkers found themselves without power for 24 hours. And for the city that never sleeps, it was a chance to do a whole lot more than a little dancing in the dark.
The 77 blackout was an incredible cultural and social experiment that showed the best and the worst of humanity.
When a lightning bolt hit an upstate New York power station, a domino effect pulled the plug on the Big Apple.
We were standing on the end of the pier on the East River watching thunderstorms to the north and happened to see that the lights went out. People just sort of had, initially, kind of had a party atmosphere. Life was not normal anymore. You had no lights.
The party atmosphere soon turned violent. Looting and riots broke out, running the damage tab up to $1 billion.
And I think there are more stories of people helping each other out than of looting or crime.
New Yorkers are wonderful in handling big things. So when they have something like a blackout, they can handle it, and they help each other, and they assist each other. You saw that with September 11th.
Even though it brought out bad, it brought out good. It kind of brought New Yorkers together, even if we had to get together in the dark.
The blackout also spawned an urban myth that the birth rate jumped in the city exactly 9 months after the blackout.
Yeah, there was a myth that, in fact, I actually always thought it was true. I didn't know whether it was true or not true.
I just kind of like the idea that the whole city is going to hell. It's dark, there are riots everywhere, and everybody just says, oh, well, let's have sex. I mean,
It's a great idea.
yeah, I know. Why shouldn't people believe
Why
it?
do they need a blackout?
I mean, the emergency broadcast system test always came on the wrong part. You'd be like, you see Columbo be like, oh, there's just one more.
This is a test
to the emergency broadcast system.
For the next 60 seconds, this station will conduct a test.
God is giving you a fax.
How can you take off Wheel of Fortune? I'm just about to solve the puzzle, and you're telling me about some tornado.
It's weird to get tested by your television, you know?
Yeah, in 1963, the FCC comes up with this emergency broadcast system, and we're at the height of the Cold War at that time, and had just come off the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the government needed some way to get to everybody at the same time.
Think about it. I mean, if you didn't have your TV on to see that lower third banner and hear the alert, I mean, you'd have no idea.
Today, thanks to more sophisticated warning systems, it's not just the couch potatoes who get saved from severe weather.
There's so many great things in technology today that can give you a warning, like your cell phone.
I've had Jim Cantori call me my house before. Hello?
Hi, I'm meteorologist Jim Cantori, and this is a severe weather alert from Notified by the Weather Channel and
It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and this automated voice of Jim Cantori is coming on my phone and telling me to go to my basement. It's cool.
You can have your computer put the warning, just have it scroll across the front of your computer.
So we're so much better off now than we ever used to be, just because of how fast information is processed and sent to you.
This has been a test of the emergency broadcast system.
If this had been an actual emergency, you would be asked to do something.
Unlike sports, there is no men's and women's science, just science. But well into the 1940s, the study of the weather was very much a men's-only field. That all changed when one extraordinary young woman seized her chance to compete.
There will never be another Dr. Joanne Simpson, 1949 first woman to ever get a PhD in meteorology from the University of Chicago.
She's been a founder of our
hurricane tropical meteorology.
She is a numerical modeler, a theoretician, as well as an observationalist. She developed some of the first cloud models.
During World War II, a lot of women were brought into professions that they haven't been brought into. In a way, Joanne Simpson was a scientific Rosie the Riveter. The war ended, and she decided to get a PhD in meteorology.
She was basically told that women should not be getting PhD degrees. They should do something rather harmless and not very important.
Boy, if somebody told me I couldn't get a PhD because of my gender, that's just, that's sort of backwards, especially in our era.
What I do know of Joanne, it probably just made her more determined.
She's been a hero of mine. I mean, she said, I can do it. No one's going to stop me. It's a sea of men. They didn't want her there. But she said, I'm smart. This is what I want. I'm good at it. I'm passionate. And I'm just going to make it.
It was a hard struggle to get a PhD, but I finally made it. I've retired as a role model now because there's a whole next generation of women that can act as role models for the younger ones getting in the field today.
The sun is creating this energy in its interior, and it's just blasting out into space, and we're bathed in that energy.
In just 1 hour, if we could harness it, the sunlight that bathes the Earth could meet the world's energy needs for an entire year. In 1941, a Bell Labs scientist constructed silicone-based photovoltaic cells to convert the sun's rays into electricity.
Solar photovoltaic cells, yes, the capability of taking the sun's energies, laying them down in a little chip, and instantly creating electricity. Pretty cool, huh?
Today, as the atmosphere becomes more polluted and the world's fuel supplies run out, the answer to the global energy crisis might be as plain as day.
We need new sources of energy, and solar energy is the primary place we ought to be looking.
There are many parts of the world where you do get a lot of sunshine.
We can use it without any negative side effects, and it's persistent, it's there, so it's one of the most important sources of renewable energy that we can imagine.
People are trying to move that way, and there's a big push for that. Any kind of alternatives to fossil fuels are a good thing. We know that.
To be living in a time when people speak of capturing some of that energy and putting it to use, it's very exciting and beautiful to imagine.
My hope is that we're going to see that for vehicles, and we're going to see that for a lot of the things that we use.
There's a connection there with the sun, with technology, and with weather that's amazing.
Up next, a coin toss call and strong wind gives us one of college football's greatest comeback games when the 100 biggest weather moments continues. Welcome back to the 100 biggest weather moments. It can be the most important decision of a football game, and it's often made before most fans even find their seats. The coin toss not only decides which team receives the ball first, it lets a coach strategize when his quarterback is throwing with the wind or against it. For the 1979 Cotton Bowl, that choice between heads or tails set the stage for one of college football's greatest games and put a part-time QB on the path to greatness.
January 1st, 1979, the Cotton Bowl, one of the greatest college football comebacks ever, Notre Dame, Houston.
Right now, the game time temperature is 22 degrees, and there's an 18-mile-per-hour wind out of the north.
Football fans are understandably fascinated by cold, extreme temperatures, Arctic conditions. But most players will tell you it's the wind that has more of an effect on the game.
In the fourth quarter, down 34-12. Now, under 8 minutes left, you figure the game's over.
All the points in the game were scored by the team that had the wind behind her. At least it seemed that way.
The wind was such a factor, but then Montana got the ball, and he had the wind at his back, it seemed like, most of the time. And he moved Notre Dame down the field, and, they got back into the ball game. That's where you first heard about Montana, and you realize, what a factor that this guy is going to be.
Montana going, and it's a touchdown. A touchdown taken at the corner. Unbelievable finish.
He came through, and it really was the luck of the Irish. Touchdown on the last play of the game to get the win 35-34. There's an old Irish lore that may the wind always be at your back, and guess what? That day it certainly was.
When the Indonesian island volcano Krakatoa erupted on March 26, 1883, the massive explosion was heard 2,000 miles away in Australia. The small island blew itself apart when 6 million cubic miles of debris was launched into the atmosphere.
That's beyond anybody's knowledge or experience. I mean, to have a whole island literally explode and vaporize.
The huge layer of particles traveled around the globe, causing blood-red sunsets worldwide.
These volcanic eruptions always cause spectacular sunsets because of all the debris up in the atmosphere, all these ash, these small microscopic particles that are floating around up there cause these spectacular, incredible sunsets.
These vibrant sunsets were seen by famed painter Edvard Munch in his hometown, Oslo, Norway. Munch is most famous for the painting of The Scream, with its eerily disturbing face set against a blood-red sky. The connection between Krakatoa, spectacular sunsets, and The Scream is suggested in Munch's writings.
From his unpublished notes, he said he was walking with these guys, and he just suddenly got so sad, and he stopped, and all of a sudden the sky just turned bright blood red. He paused, and he went by the side, and just really felt paralyzed.
Munch wrote that he felt a great unending scream piercing through nature, inspiring him to put his emotions on canvas.
I knew that the Krakatoa, that it did cause a lot of red sunsets for a long time, but I had no idea that it had been painted into that picture. That's amazing.
When the 100 Biggest Weather Moments returns.
This is a man who's got more records than I have socks.
I worked for Richard Nixon. I never heard anything like that.
It's always sunny in Southern California.
Welcome back. There's one fact regarding our next weather moment that everybody agrees on. Something fell out of the sky on July 4th, 1947, creating a sensation in the community of Roswell, New Mexico. That, however, is where consensus ends, and one of our nation's greatest mysteries begins. Was it a weather experiment gone wrong, or a visit from little green men?
Remember what Benjamin Franklin said. 3 can keep a secret so long as 2 are dead.
On the 4th of July, 1947, some unusual-looking debris fell from the sky on a farm outside of Roswell, New Mexico. When the U.S. Air Force made clumsy attempts to explain the debris as parts of a fallen weather balloon, local gossip and a national media frenzy spawned 2 cultural phenomena that still won't die.
The Air Force called them unidentified flying objects, but people went right on calling them saucers.
Right there, when whatever it was landed near Roswell, New Mexico, was the whole beginning of one wondering about UFOs.
I know it wasn't a weather balloon, okay? I know it's aliens.
And also just the beginnings of questioning the government. Can we depend on the government to tell us the truth?
It just goes to show you that whenever the government tries to cover something up, they don't do a very good job of it in the first place, and it tends to lead to all the grassy knoll theories.
I don't think it was a UFO or a weather balloon. I think it was a Zeppelin carrying aliens.
I worked for Richard Nixon. I never heard anything like that.
I mean, it may have been something experimental that we were doing, and, you know, it crashed. I don't know if it was aliens, but it wasn't what the government says.
Why did they never land in the backyard of an astronomer? Land in Mike Wallace's backyard. Come here, you little gray. I have questions for you.
The legend of Roswell endures. As for a mistrust of the government,
as a former member of the Air Force, I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of Area 51, the aliens, or the spacecraft.
Steve Fossett is one of America's great adventurers. This millionaire businessman from Chicago holds 23 world sailing records and 93 world aviation records. He loves a challenge.
In his spare time, he's swum the English Channel, done the Iditarod dog sled race, and just for good measure, he did the Ironman triathlon. These are just in-between records.
But for all his accomplishments, one record remained elusive for Fossett, a non-stop solo balloon flight around the world. For 10 years, he tried obsessively to succeed in his high-flying quest, but weather was his constant nemesis. His 5th attempt was almost deadly.
He got clobbered by a thunderstorm over the Coral Sea. Put him right in the drink. He lived to tell the tale, but just barely.
His near-fatal 5-mile plunge into the Coral Sea only served to make Fawcett more determined. Mounting a 6th attempt on June 19, 2002 from Australia, he added a new team of Belgian meteorologists and some advanced computer models to predict wind currents, trajectory, and weather systems. For 14 days, the team guided Fawcett around cyclones, dipped him under thunderstorms, and found the 58-year-old daredevil a friendly jet stream for the final leg back to Australia.
Fawcett's trip in the jet stream around the globe, that was conquering weather. That was pretty gutsy.
His 10-year quest for another world record was finally over.
You know, a record like that where man can actually take weather and use it to his advantage and really do something pretty cool. That'll stand for a while. Heat waves are the #1 killer. I mean, if you go back and look over the last 10, 20, 30 years, I mean, you're going to find, I think, more deaths from the heat than anything else.
In August of 2003, the worst heat wave in Europe's recorded history descended upon the continent. A high-pressure dome of air suffocated Western Europe for a month, creating record-high temperatures in Germany, England, Switzerland, and France, countries that have little commercial or residential air conditioning.
To have air conditioning is something that's sort of seen as an unnecessary luxury, and most European houses just don't have it. You open the window and that's it.
It just built up over the summer, and people were hot, and they never got any relief. They saw triple-digit temperatures in places that they'd never saw it before, and they didn't get a break when they went to bed at night.
The unrelenting heat produced Europe's worst natural disaster in 50 years, with wide-ranging crop losses, increased glacier melting in Switzerland, and rampaging forest fires in Portugal that destroyed 10% of her forests. But by far, the worst impact was the death toll, estimated at between 35 to 50,000.
It's a little hard to understand how that many people died.
The people that get hit hardest in a heat wave like this are obviously the elderly, children, and especially elderly and children among the poor, who find themselves trapped in an oven that they can't escape from.
The lesson is even today's nasty climate events, which are bound to get worse, are things that we really have a lot of trouble handling.
In late fall of 1979, a mob of angry young revolutionaries stormed the U.S. Embassy in the capital city of Iran, taking more than 60 Americans hostage. After months of dead-end diplomacy, President Jimmy Carter decided a more drastic measure was needed to bring our citizens home. The dramatic military rescue was planned to a T, but a sudden desert sandstorm in Iran soon had the political winds howling back in the United States.
On November 4th, 1979, Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Iran and seized 66 American hostages. After months of fruitless negotiations and 52 Americans still held hostage, a beleaguered President Carter ordered a secret rescue mission into the Iranian desert. Flying at night, 6 transport planes and 8 helicopters were depending on a full moon and good weather. But a mile-high desert sandstorm known as a haboob kicked up in front of the helicopters. They were flying into the unknown.
I said, send a message that we've encountered some restriction to visibility out here, but we're pressing on through it, and they should too.
I can remember asking, what is that up there? Looks like we're flying into a mountain or something. I knew it wasn't a fog, and I knew it wasn't a cloud. It's kind of like flying in a milk bottle.
The sandstorm caused confusion and chaos. Pilots lost visual contact with one another, veered off course, and before the night was over, 3 choppers were lost to the mission. One to mechanical failure in the desert, a second when the pilot became disoriented in the sandstorm and had to turn back, and a 3rd chopper became inoperable after pushing through the storm. With the mission forced to abort because of the chopper losses, an unimaginable tragedy occurred when the desert dust swirled around one of the remaining choppers, limiting the pilot's visibility.
In the course of this debacle, 8 servicemen died when a helicopter crashed into a C-130 transport plane.
It certainly made America look bad in the eyes of the world.
The failure of the mission to rescue the hostages was really the death blow to the Carter administration.
The big reason it failed that night was the weather.
There is no doubt, had that suspended dust storm not been there, this mission would have been complete.
Sure enough, we had some mechanical problems, but so what? We could have worked around that.
And only history would be the judge of whether it was a success or not.
It wasn't until 1950 that a formal hurricane naming system was developed to avoid the confusion of longitude and latitude descriptions. The first scheme adopted military-style handles like Able, Baker, and Charlie. This was dropped in 1953 in favor of short female names.
Then in 1978, we started alternating between male and female names.
Names given to storms that became infamous were retired from the alphabetical rotation, never to be used again.
When you say that name, it just means so much more because it's personifying what that storm was.
Vanna would be a good name because there aren't that many Vannas. You'd name it after her, but it would just die in the Atlantic and wouldn't cause any trouble. Not that I want Vanna to die in the Atlantic, you understand.
I think hurricane should sound scary, and Hurricane Bob
isn't scary at all. I mean, Hurricane Bob, there are a lot of Bobs. Nothing wrong with the name Bob, but there are a lot of Bobs in the world.
Hey, everybody, Hurricane Bob's coming. Is he bringing pizza?
I still get letters almost every week asking us to name a hurricane after somebody's mother-in-law or girlfriend or wife or what have you.
While at the National Hurricane Center in Miami, the late John Hope, former Weather Channel hurricane expert, was urged by a colleague to submit a sentimental family name for the list. Little did anyone know at the time what that hurricane would become.
Hurricane Camille has to be one of the strongest Category 5 hurricanes to hit the United States, at least in our memorable history. And that was John Hope's daughter's name, Camille.
It was an amazing thing to see, just miles and miles and miles of things leveled.
When Hurricane Andrew howled into Florida on the evening of August 24th, 1992, it was only the third Category 5 demon to ever make landfall in the U.S. With wind speeds gusting more than 170 miles per hour, it shook South Miami to its core.
Where I was in a parking garage in Coconut Grove, the winds were so intense, the concrete parking garage was actually shaking.
When the eye wall hit, it was like someone taking a big gearbox and just revving the whole thing right up. It just went crazy outside.
The wind was this absolutely freaky, screeching, screaming noise. It sounded like the devil screaming.
When the sun came up the next morning, South Miami looked like a war zone.
No street signs, no street lights. You got lost a few blocks away from where you grew up.
If I hadn't seen some of my neighbors walking around, I'm not sure how long it would have taken me to find my home.
People were walking around dazed and helping each other.
With 100,000 homes damaged or destroyed, recovery from Hurricane Andrew was painfully slow.
The devastation afterwards, people don't understand. They look at New Orleans right now and they wonder, gee, it's taken them a long time to rebuild. Well, we from Miami knew it would take them years and years to rebuild.
And I'll never forget the T-shirt that we had down here after Andrew that said, "I survived Andrew, but the recovery is killing me."
The scars last a long time, and the emotional scars last a very, very long time.
We'll take a break, but coming up next on the 100 biggest weather moments.
And then all of a sudden, the skies parted.
Major hardships because there was no summer, there was no crops, there was no food.
The 100 biggest weather moments brought to you by Nationwide, reminding you that life comes at you fast, so be prepared.
Life comes at you fast.
And Nationwide understands. That's why we guarantee accident repairs in writing when your car's fixed at a certified Blue Ribbon repair shop. So switch to us. See what life's like with a guarantee.
Nationwide is on your side.
Welcome back. For a director, it's easier to get an actor to laugh or an actress to cry than to motivate a rainy day into being sunny. What film professionals love is clear skies, and Southern California has plenty to spare. When it comes to Hollywood, the weather is as perfect as a movie star's $1 million smile.
Los Angeles became Hollywood because of the weather. Pretty much, it's beautiful.
In the early 1900s, the young American film industry was based in New Jersey. The primitive cameras and film of the day required the sun to properly light a scene.
In the early days of film, interior lighting was not that good, so they had to shoot a lot of exteriors.
Chaplin's first studio, the roof was non-existent. There were these translucent fabrics over the roof that let in the sun, which dispersed the sunlight into a perfect light for the interior scenes.
Dreary northeastern winters forced producers to find a climate where they could shoot outdoors year-round.
It's always sunny in Southern California, 70 to 80 degrees most of the time.
I used to laugh when I did the weather in Los Angeles, and you'd say the average rainfall is 0.
it's an ideal place. You can always count on having decent weather for any kind of shoot you want.
By 1925, just 15 years after the first movie was shot in Hollywood, a mass migration west tripled the population of Los Angeles, and the film industry had become the fourth largest business in America. Decades later, the core product remains the same: American culture with Californian flavor.
Hollywood is synonymous with America all over the world.
Every street had a cul-de-sac, and every place looked like Knots Landing.
It's the cultural heart of the United States. I mean, more countries in the world watch Hollywood products than any other country.
I've done movies in Toronto. I did one in Mexico City, but Hollywood is Hollywood.
Difficult for me to imagine the science of meteorology without an anemometer.
The anemometer was invented by Italian architect Leon Battista Alberti. However, the first practical anemometer to measure wind speed was built by Englishman Robert Hooke in the middle of the 19th century.
Anemometers are wind measuring devices. Everything that we knew for many, many years about the airflow came from anemometers, and anemometers only.
They come in all sorts of configurations. You'll see them as little spinning cups with little wind vanes on roofs of weather centers and so on.
I got a handheld anemometer here. We're looking at probably about 35-mile-an-hour winds standing on this deck right now.
The traditional anemometer is what many people see is the little thing with three cups that's spinning, looks like a kind of a beanie hat.
Now we have very sophisticated devices, even things called sonic anemometers that actually use sound to determine how fast the wind is blowing.
Anemometers typically do not survive in very extreme environments such as hurricanes or as in tornadoes, not because of the wind. It's fairly straightforward to build an anemometer that will hold up to 300-mile-an-hour winds. The two-by-four, however, that's flying along in the wind takes out the anemometers very well. To understand anything from science, you have to be able to measure.
Without those measurements, without those observations, we have nothing.
Well, Patton believed in prayer, but he also believed in destiny, and his great appointment with destiny, of course, was the Battle of the Bulge.
Beneath the clouds and snow of the Ardennes forest, Adolf Hitler thrust 250,000 Nazi troops into the heart of the Allied lines. The United States 101st Airborne found themselves surrounded by Panzer tanks in the Belgian city of Bastogne. Realizing that the foul winter weather was keeping air support from rescuing the besieged unit, American General George Patton issued his most famous and unorthodox command.
Patton called in his senior rank and chaplain. They said, we got to get Third Army praying for good weather. And he said, but I need you to go write a prayer. So Colonel goes off and writes a prayer. They printed 250,000 copies in about a 2-day period. Then they handed it out to the troops.
And then all of a sudden, the skies parted. The fog slipped away.
They got clear skies for a week that were not forecasted.
And the air power came in and turned back the Panzers. And the Americans held the Belgian village of Bastogne.
And as we know, that's what turned the tide of the Battle of the Bulge, and we were able to get air power in there and air superiority to take out the Germans.
It took another few weeks of hard fighting, but the Battle of the Bulge was over. And it was over because the skies opened.
If TV had existed in 1816, not many New Englanders would have believed their local weatherman forecasting snow in summer. But sure enough, that's exactly what fell out of the sky one day in June. Come to find out, the weather was more than a little off all over the globe that year. And the reason why was quite powerful.
Just look at your tree ring record for the past 500 years and find the fattest ring. Find the biggest, widest, most obvious ring, and that's going to be the year 1816, the year without a summer. Mount Tambora was a stratovolcano that, much like Mount St. Helens in 1980, but at a much greater scale, violently erupted in the year 1815 and caused major destruction of the immediate environment, caused major loss of life.
Nearly 100,000 people were killed in the Indonesian province surrounding Tambora, making it the deadliest eruption in recorded history. So great was the power of this geological phenomenon that for an entire year it altered the world's weather.
A large-scale volcanic emission can get high enough in the atmosphere that it can travel around the globe multiple times.
And in all this ash and debris, these clouds get up into the upper portions of the atmosphere, way up there. We're getting, 30,000 feet, 40,000 feet. Sometimes it breaks through the stratosphere, and these winds just take all this debris and circle the Earth.
The gas emissions from Tambora blanketed the Earth and choked out the sun's rays. Worldwide crop failure caused global food shortages.
You would have decreases in production of crops because there simply wasn't enough sunlight to grow the crops that were needed to eat.
Major hardships because there was no summer, there was no growing season, there was no crops, there was no food. It was experienced here in the United States as well. This one eruption of a single mountain, a stratovolcano, caused a global cooling event.
Up next, a legendary nor'easter that inspired a best-selling book and a major motion picture when the 100 biggest weather moments continues.
Plug in, the first ultra-adaptable room, only from Marriott.
Whatever the season, when a storm gathers, so do we.
Welcome back to the Countdown. So you want to know if it's going to rain for the work week? Just flip on the Weather Channel, log on to weather.com, or even check your cell phone. But back in the 18th century, your best bet on finding a forecast? Open a book.
I mean, the almanac was basically the first version of the Weather Channel. It was probably less scientifically accurate.
Equal parts science and homespun folklore, almanacs provided the only, if unreliable, weather information available to the citizens of colonial America. The most famous of these journals came from an ambitious young publisher under the pseudonym Poor Richard.
Ben Franklin was something of a Renaissance person in that he was fascinated by all aspects of human behavior and natural behavior. And as such, weather had great appeal to him. He figured out many things well before his time.
Back in his day, he was probably the most professional meteorologist there was.
A lot of our forefathers up there in colonial times were weather enthusiasts, which makes sense because they were farmers.
Back then, that was what the almanacs were very important for, is knowing when to plant the given crops, when to harvest the given crops. Interspersed among that, almanac makers would also put in lots and lots of folksy advice.
Early to bed, early to rise will make you healthy, wealthy, and wise.
A countryman between two lawyers is like a fish between two cats.
A penny saved is a penny earned.
Franklin earned more than just a penny. In the high-stakes game of almanac weather prediction, he outsold all his competitors and was Poor Richard no more.
For him, it's all about the Benjamins, you know?
Everything has to be almost perfect to create something that monstrous.
In the fall of 1991, fishing boats, large and small, sailed out of New England coastal towns, seeking the teeming fishing grounds of the North Atlantic. It was a ritual that had been going on for centuries, but this time it would be different. Before Halloween, they would experience an event unlike any in modern history, a storm so unique, it was literally the perfect storm.
If you get an intense storm, very low pressure, and you get a monstrous high pressure right behind it, the difference in the pressure between those two systems is going to create a hellacious wind. Then you throw in the third element, a hurricane, that just exploded it. I mean, you just don't see that happen.
I was the Atlantic High Seas forecaster. I came on shift trying to decide if we were going to believe what we were seeing in our computer models.
The perfect storm battered New England coastal cities, but it was the high seas that bore the brunt of the storm's fury. Part of that story is chronicled in a best-selling book and a movie starring George Clooney as the real-life captain of the fishing trawler Andrea Gale, lost at sea with its 6-man crew in the 100-foot extreme waves.
It's no wonder that the Andrea Gale, the boat that was lost there, was lost. I don't see how you could survive in something like that.
No vessel is safe in a 100-foot sea or even a 50-foot sea.
When the 3-day storm finally weakened and the battered coastline surveyed the damage, estimated at almost $1 billion, meteorologists were still shaking their heads in wonder.
I hope we don't ever see anything like that again. That was one for the record books.
That's it for this hour. When our countdown continues, a fog bank helps create a nation. We journey somewhere over the rainbow, and sports fans are introduced to the frozen tundra. I'm Harry Connick Jr. We'll see you next time.
I got a letter from a gentleman in Damascus, Syria. He wanted us to name a hurricane after, I can't remember the name, but it started with the letter R. and he said it had to be a hurricane that hit Central Florida. It had to cause a lot of damage and loss of life. He said then and only then would the world know the pure hell that he'd gone through for 18 years being married to this woman with that name. He said if we did that, he would deposit a sum of money in a bank account. Maybe we should have done it.